The Suez Canal is an artificial double-passage waterway in Egypt with a length of more than 190 kilometers and connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. It's considered the fastest sea passage between the two continents and provides an average of about 15 days of voyage time via the Cape of Good Hope Road. The idea of establishing the canal began in 1798 with the advent of the French campaign against Egypt. Napoleon thought of building the canal, but the step was not crowned with success. In 1954, the Lesseps managed to convince Mohammed Sid Pasha of the project and obtained the approval of the Sublime Porte, according to which he granted the French company headed by the Lesseps has the concession to dig and operate the canal for a period of 99 years. The construction of the canal took 10 years, 1859, 1869, and nearly a million Egyptian workers contributed to the drilling process, of whom more than 120,000 died during the drilling process as a result of hunger, thirst epidemics, and well treatment, and the canal was opened in 1869 in a solemn ceremony and with a huge budget. In 1905, the French company tried to extend the concession for an additional 50 years, but that attempt did not succeed in its endeavors. In July 1956, President Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, which caused Britain and French to declare Israel participation in the war on Egypt as a part of the tripartite aggression, which ended with their withdrawal under international pressure and popular resistance. In 1967, war caused the closure of the Suez Canal for more than 8 years until President Sadat reopened it in June 1975 after the disengagement between Egypt and Israel and the Cair's fire within the events of the October War. After that, the canal witnessed several projects to expand its course and reduce its transit time, which began in 1980, and the last of them was on August 6, 2015, with the inauguration of the new Suez Canal project. The Suez Canal is one of the most important seaways in the world, as the canal's revenues in the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 amounted to about $5,940 billion, between 8% and 12% of world trade volume passes through the canal. The ancient Egyptians were the first to build a canal to connect the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea through the Nile River and its branches. The first canal was established by Senusret III, one of the kings of the 12th dynasty, in 1974 BC. Then it was neglected and reopened several times under several names, including City A Canal in 1310 BC, Dara A Channel in 510 BC, then the Channel of Ptolemy II in 285 BC, and the Roman Canal during the reign of Emperor Trajan in 117, and the commander of the Faithful Canal in 640 after the Islamic conquest of Egypt at the hands of Amr ibn al-As, and it remained for 150 years until the Abbasid Caliph Abu Ja'far al-Mansur ordered the filling of the canal that connected Fustad and Suez and blocked it from the side of Suez to prevent any supplies from Egypt to the people of Mecca and Medina revolting against to Abbasid rule, after which Harun al-Rashid opened it for a period, and after him it was filled again. Then the sea road to India and the countries of the east was closed and goods became transported across the desert by caravans, and the canal was closed until 1820, when the Portuguese discovered the road Cape of Good Hope at the beginning of the 16th century AD. The global trade movement changed with it. After the Portuguese Vasco da Gama discovered the Cape of Good Hope Road, the economy and trade of Mamluk Egypt and the economy of Venice, Naples, and Genoa were severely damaged. It was only from the Venetian princes that they came to Egypt in 1501 to present to Sultan al-Ghuri an idea of dispensing with the caravan routes and replacing them with the transportation across the Nile by digging a canal. It connects the Red and White Seas, but the circumstances of Egypt and its conflict with the Ottomans at that time, which ended with their occupation of Cairo in 1517, did not allow the establishment of a project of this size, and the project died until the famous German philosopher Leibniz proposed it to King Louis XIV within the framework of a comprehensive project to invade Egypt. But King Louis didn't want to anger the Sublime Porte in Constantinople on the one hand, and because his expansionist dreams were in Europe. And when the French Revolution arose, they entered into bloody armed conflicts with the kingdoms of Europe, and it was able to defeat it, except for one kingdom, which is England. France wanted to cut off the path of the British colonies in India by occupying Egypt, so the French campaign against Egypt took place in 1798. The government of the Directorate that ruled France gave a direct order to Napoleon Bonaparte to carry out a campaign to dig a canal linking Bahrain, which is why it was called the Bahrain Canal. Napoleon left Cairo with a group of engineers headed by an engineer named Lauper to inspect the side of Suez and start digging. However, Lauper convinced Napoleon to abandon the project because he discovered that the level of the Red Sea was higher than the level of the White Sea, which would cause the sinking of all Egypt. Napoleon returned to Cairo without achieving his goal, and that is until a group of engineers from the famous Polytechnic school graduates took over the project and were fascinated by the greatness of Napoleon and called them the Saint-Simonians, and they came to Egypt in the era of Muhammad Ali in 1832, and they obtained his permission to go to the site again and found out to them that Bahrain is two levels and that Napoleon's engineer miscalculated and estimated. However, Muhammad Ali rejected the idea of digging the canal except with two conditions. The first is that the great powers guarantee the neutrality of the canal and thus the independence of Egypt. And the second is that the canal be funded entirely from the Egyptian treasury, which demonstrated the skill and far-sightedness of Muhammad Ali Pasha in the issue of the canal, but the two conditions were rejected. After Napoleon's return to France in 1901, after the failure of this campaign against Egypt, which lasted 13 months, he sent a diplomat named Matteo de Lesseps to Egypt to choose a governor for Egypt loyal to France to rule it after the British chose Bardisi. So Matteo de Lesseps chose Muhammad Ali, the Albanian office close to the sheikhs of Al-Azhar, chose him and gave him advice and assistance, which Muhammad Ali didn't forget. When Matteo de Lesseps died, his young son Ferdinand de Lesseps came as an assistant consul to this country. France in Alexandria, Muhammad Ali received him with a great hospitality and offered him to work in the palace as an educator and teacher for his son Muhammad Said Pasha. This strengthened the bonds of friendship between the French diplomat and the prince. And after Said Pasha came to power, at a time when the Lesseps family was suffering from poverty and isolation since the fall of Napoleon's empire, it was only from the Lesseps that he boarded the first ship bound of Alexandria to reach it on November 7 and 1854 and meet his friend who became the Khedive of Egypt. On November 11, there the Lesseps presented the canal digging project to Said Pasha, who immediately accepted what his father refused, as if Said wanted to express his gratitude to his old friend who has given him the food that his father had forbidden him from inside the palace. The Lesseps entrusted the French engineer Fawazan Bey with the position of chief engineer of the canal excavation side, who has responsible for the daily life at the excavation side in all its details, from the progress of the excavation process, expenses, relations between workers of different nationalities, and the issue of forced labor imposed on Egyptian peasants by orders of the Lesseps as chairman of the International Maritime Suez Canal Company, which he had founded to undertake drilling operations at the site. The Lesseps was subjected to pressure and accusations by the son Simonis that he stole from them the canal project that they presented to Muhammad Ali, and he projected it. In 1856, the ruler of Egypt, the Khedive Mohammed Said Pasha, granted the French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps II concession for digging the Suez Canal. The Egyptian government holds 15% of the canal's profits, and soon Ferdinand de Lesseps established the International Suez Canal Maritime Company with a capital of 200 million French francs distributed over 400,000 shares, the values of each share being 500 francs, and the company's shares were offered in the international market in November 1858, and the French subscribed about more than 20,000 shares, equivalent to half of the shares, while the Khedive subscribed to about 177,642 shares, and the rest of the subscribed shares were distributed in the international markets. The International Company for the Suez Maritime Canal began digging the canal in April 1859, and it lasted for 10 years. Hundreds of thousands of Egyptian farmers were used in that system under forced labor, and that system continued until 1864. Some sources estimate that there were more than 30,000 workers in the canal during any period of its digging, and that the total number of workers reached 1.5 million people of various nationalities, and thousands of workers died as a result of cholera and other similar epidemics. The Lesseps alone drew up the list of workers and obtained the signature of Khedive Said on it, which guaranteed the Suez Maritime Canal Company, French at the time, the enormous human resources by mobilizing the Egyptian to dig the canal according to the request submitted by the chief engineer of the company and according to the needs of the work. And the second article specified the workers' wages, which ranged between 1.5 piastres and 3 piastres per day, and if the worker was under 12 years of age, he was paid 1 piastre per day, and the company was committed to providing crisp bread to each worker regardless of his age. The regulation stipulates imposing penalties on workers fleeing from excavations. The neglected worker is deducted from his wage in proportion to the amount of his negligence. As for the worker who escapes, he loses the 15 days' wages kept in the company's treasury. The regulation also stipulates the work of field hospital on the excavation area and health centers, ambulance with medicines. The chapter of the workers' suffering began when the company broke its promise to dig a freshwater canal to supply the workers with drinking water, which led to the sacrifice of thousands of workers who were exhausted by the intensity of thirst and landslides. Then thousands of people fell due to the spread of epidemics, and the company also violated its promise to provide advanced means of drilling and forced the Egyptian workers to work in harsh conditions, relying only on their forearms, the axe and the stand. In December 1861, Said Pasha himself went to the excavation area and ordered the mobilization of 20,000 young men to increase the rate of excavation. Thus, the first years of digging for the canal witnessed the largest mobilization of workers. In 1862, between 20,000 and 22,000 workers were driven to the excavation yards per month. Coming from Upper Egypt and Upper Egypt, workers revolted and fled, and Upper Egypt workers showed a blatant challenge to the company, forcing the company to seek help from the police to kill the workers' rebellion, chase and torture them. The city of Zagazig was the area where the workers were sorted, from which those with slender bodies were excluded, and strong young men were chosen from them, who were sent to the canal area on foot in 4 days, while they were tied with ropes, each of them carrying a lag of water and a bag of dry bread. So they reached the drilling yards exhausted. So he followed their arrival, issuing orders to lay off the old workers who have spent a full month, which is the period prescribed for their stay. The excavations were among the exciting scenes that foreign tourists were keen to see in this area. The company persisted in transitions and didn't pay the wages of the workers, and the shortage of supplies, clothes and shoes continued. It also established a detention center to which those who misbehave are sent, and it established a medical department and a center for the sick to take care of the workers. But orders were issued that these departments focus its efforts only in caring for foreign workers and employees, and what was offered workers unfairly die from the severity of their diseases. According to the medical reports preserved in the Alexandria Municipal Library, the most common diseases among workers were bronchitis, chest diseases, rosacea, cases of severe diarrhea, dysentery, liver disease, smallpox, and tuberculosis. They were buried in the desert, followed by the emergence of a tragedy when the workers were exposed to a liquid mode substance that contained burning phosphorus, which led to the thousands of mysterious diseases that led to their death of the spot. And it is strange that the French government awarded on January 19, 1967 the Medal of Honor from the Knights class to Dr. Hubert Roche, the chief physician of the French company, in appreciation of his efforts, which he was said to have made in protecting Egyptian workers from death. On April 25, 1959, the Lesseps graduated the digging of the canal during the reign of Khedive Said, and the work ended after 10 years during the reign of Khedive Ismail, who traveled to Europe on May 17, 1969 to invite kings, princes, heads of government, politicians, science, literature, and art to attend the opening ceremony of the canal, which he intended to hold on November 17, 1869. After the Khedive Ismail returned to Egypt, he began to prepare for the big party. So he used 500 chiefs and 1,000 servants to be at the service of the guests, and he asked the Lesseps to make preparations for the hospitality of 6,000 guests. On October 15, 1969, the plaintiffs began to come as a guest to Egypt in Port Said, the seat of the ceremony, which was crowded with Egyptians coming from all over Egypt to witness to opening activities. At the behest of Khedive Ismail to the directors of the regions to send each of them a group of families with their women, children, household items and rights, so they spread out on the length of the channel. Arabs, Sudanese, peasants and Saida expression all sects of the Egyptian people, while Khedive Ismail traveled with his entourage and ministers Nubar Pasha and Sharif Pasha to Alexandria, where he boarded his guarded yacht and sailed to Port Said. Khedive Ismail saw ships coming from all parts of the world carrying his guests present at his own expense. The banks of the canal forces the Egyptian army to maintain order of celebration. Cannon shots rang out, celebrating the arrival of the guests one by one. The activities began with a religious party in the afternoon of November 16, 1969, and the 3 large wooden platforms were set up on the seashore, covered with silk and brocade, decorated with flags, and furnished with the most valuable carpets. The Muslims are led by Sheikh al-Saka, Sheikh al-Amrusi, and Sheikh al-Mahdi al-Abbasi, the Grand Mufti of Egypt, while the left platform is dedicated to the priests of the Christian religion and clergymen, headed by Monsieur Corsia, Bishop of Alexandria, and Monsieur Power, the papal messenger. On the Asian shore, Port Said, cavalrymen set up magnificent umbrellas for the invited masses. On the African shore, the ships stood in the form of an arc, and their number was more than 80, along with 50 warships, including 6 Egyptian, the same French, 12 English, 7 Austrian, 5 German, 1 Russian, 1 Danish, 2 Dutch, and 2 Spanish. The canal was opened, and the greatest benefit from it was to the West, represented by the great powers, and Egypt remained the last beneficiary for a long period, estimated at more than 50 years. On July 26, 1956, President Jamal Abdel Nasser announced from Manshia Square in Alexandria the decision to nationalize the Suez Canal Company after the United States withdrew its offer of financing the high dam in a humiliating manner to Egypt. Then Britain and the World Bank followed suit. Following the decision, Britain submitted a protest, which was rejected by Jamal Abdel Nasser on the grounds that nationalization was an act of Egyptian sovereignty. So the Suez Canal Beneficiaries Authority withdrew the fragrant goods in the canal to prove that Egypt is unable to manage the canal on its own. However, Egypt proved the opposite and was able to operate the canal under an Egyptian administration, headed by the engineer of the nationalization process, Mahmoud Yunus, accompanied by his colleagues Abdelhamid Abu Bakr and Mohammed Izzat Adil. After Egypt proved its ability to operate the canal independently of the West, these angered France, America, and Britain, and declared war on Egypt after failed attempts to subjugate Egypt and take the canal. It was called the tripartite aggression against Egypt, Israel, Britain, and French. Abdel Nasser saw the nationalization of the Suez Canal as his only opportunity to obtain the necessary financing for the construction of the high dam, and indeed he announced on July 26, 1956, the nationalization decision, and with the failure of diplomatic pressure on Egypt to reverse its decision, Britain, France, and Israel decided to develop a plan to use military force against Egypt called it the Sevres Protocol. They hoped to achieve their interests from that streak. On the British level, the goal was to get rid of Abdel Nasser, who threatened British influence by achieving evacuation and an alliance with the Soviets and the nations of the channel through which British interests pass. And on the French level, it was an opportunity to take revenge on Abdel Nasser, who supported the Algerian Revolution and the nations of the Canal, which was under French administration, while Israel found its opportunity to loosen the tight noose on its ships in the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aqaba and destroy the Egyptian forces in the Sinai, which posed an unexpected threat to it. According to the Sevres Protocol, on October 29, 1956, Israeli forces landed in the deeps of the Sinai and headed to the canal to convince the world that the Suez Canal was threatened. On October 30, Britain and France issued an ultimatum calling for an end to the fighting between Egypt and Israel and asking both parties to withdraw 10 kilometers from the Suez Canal and to accept occupation of the cities and the canal by British-French forces for the purpose of protecting navigation in the canal. Otherwise, their forces would intervene to implement this by force. Egypt in turn announced its refusal to occupy the canal region, and the next day, October 31, the two countries attacked Egypt and began their air raids on Cairo, the canal region, and Alexandria in view of the dispersion of the Egyptian forces between the Sinai front and the canal front. So that the aggressor forces will not and annihilate them. Abdel Nasser issued order to withdraw Egyptian forces from the Sinai to the west of the canal, and the Anglo-French invasion of Egypt began from Port Said, which was struck by planes and naval forces in preparation for the airdrops. The popular resistance in Port Said resisted the occupation fiercely and arrogantly. The world moved against the aggressor forces, and the Arab countries supported Egypt in the faces of aggression and blew up oil pipelines in Syria. And on November 2, the United Nations General Assembly took a decision to stop the fighting, and on November 3, the Soviet Union issued an ultimatum to Britain, France, and Israel. He announced his determination to erase the aggression, and the United States deplored the aggression against Egypt, and this international pressure led to stopping the Anglo-French infiltration, and the two countries accepted a ceasefire starting on November 7th, followed by the entry of international emergency forces of the United Nations, and on December 19, the British flag was lowered from on top of the Suez Canal Authority building in Port Said. This was followed by the withdrawal of the French and English forces from Port Said on December 22, and on December 23 the Egyptian authorities took over the city of Port Said and reserved the Suez Canal, which is the date that Port Said Governorate took as its national holiday, which was called Victory Day. On March 16, 1957, the Israeli forces completed their withdrawal from Sinai. The aftermath of the war was the resignation of British Prime Minister Anthony Eden, Canadian Minister of Foreign Affairs Lisa Pearson winning the Nobel Peace Prize, and the war likely emboldened the Soviet Union to invade Hungary. Historians see this war as the end of Great Britain's status as one of the world's great powers. Thus, the Suez Canal has been nationalized, and from that day to this day, the canal is subject to independent Egyptian sovereignty. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button. WikiTube is the first audiovisual encyclopedia in the English version.